Once upon a time, action games were a simple affair. Side-scrolling, top-down and running and gunning, shmupping and slashing, they were good times. With the desire to be free of the shackles of big publishers, a group of devs left Konami to form a studio which would eventually become one of the greatest action game developers there ever was, creating the pinnacles of 2D action with the blazing fast speed of one blue blur's home. This is the genesis of Treasure. Well, these days we got peeps like Capcom and Platinum Games providing the sickest experiences and ultimate gamer skill. Treasure has been left at the wayside, lying dormant as its old library brings little more than a fond memory to the hearts of those who experienced them. Now personally, I've known them for a long time, but for whatever reason I never really took the opportunity to sit down and fully finish one of their games myself. Well, it's time to give them a new time in the spotlight as we explore the wondrous and awesome catalog of the work of Treasure. For variety's sake, I've attempted to try playing these games in as many different ways as possible, since most of them have been ported to tons of other platforms. And it also lets me flex my collection, but who cares about that? Let's begin. And straight out of Konami, Treasure came right out of the gate, guns blazing with the legendary Sega Genesis classic, Gunstar Heroes. Running guns had certainly been a popular genre for a while, with titles like Contra defining the genre back on the NES. But Gunstar Heroes took it to new heights with a crazy amount of set pieces and variety, with brutal yet fair challenge, all wrapped in a 2-hour runtime giving you one hell of an explosive rollercoaster ride. We got two dudes, red and blue, two brothers of a set of three, but brother green defected to the villain's side for, world domination or something. I don't know what this dictator-looking dude's motives are, but the plot is probably going to be the last thing on your mind while getting through the 7 stages of mayhem and gunfire. This is going to be a trend. To assist you on your mission, you have a choice of 2 of 4 weapons. A straight-to-the-point rapid-fire machine gun, a shorter range but more powerful and wider radius flamethrower, a homing tracer gun, and a long-range laser that requires a bit more skill to properly hit the enemy. Any 2 weapons can then be combined, creating a total of 16 unique firearms of varying usefulness. Just gonna say it here, the tracer laser is easily the most overpowered one in the game. You barely even have time to focus on aiming with it, so you can pull your attention towards the bevy of attacks foes will attempt to dish out. Of course, if you want to have more challenge, you're free to experiment as you wish, choosing whatever weapon is best for the job. It's just one of many mechanics that adds tons of extra depth into the combat. Alongside your weapon, you must also choose an aiming style. Do you want to run and shoot at the same time? Or would you prefer to have full directional control but be unable to move while shooting? I prefer the freeze style personally. You also have the ability to slide, throw enemies to damage others, do this cool dive, and more. The vast variety in moves allows for tons of freedom in how you get through the game, and one style of play may work better for some stages and bosses than others. The weapon selection may not be the most balanced, but almost everything is fun as hell to use. But how you play is just one thing, the scenarios are another. Gunstar Heroes takes you through the typical run-and-gun shooting approach, but soon you'll be ascending rocket ship platforms, riding gravity-defying minecarts switching back and forth between walls to dodge enemy attacks, and you even have a shmup stage that is fairly well done. And it won't be the last time Treasure experiments with genre shifting in their games. They just love their shmups. But the stages are really only there to lead up to the bosses, which showcase some of the most creative and technically impressive enemy designs on the Sega Genesis. Move over, Knack! 7 Force was changing forms using small pieces of metal back in 1993. Just look at this shit! The pseudo 3D and scaling effects are off the charts! And this is only the first of many times Treasure will flex their knowledge of the console's hardware through awesome boss fights. The amount of chaos on screen at any one point is just insane! Among the many awesome bosses, the standout easily has to be, as I said before, 7 Force. Form-changing boss fights aren't exactly an original idea, but the sheer insanity of the amount of forms you have to get through is fucking wild. Look at this shit. You'll think you're down, but it keeps pulling out one more just as you barely got through the last one. With enough experience though, you'll be able to get through each of these phases with no problem, which is part of what makes Treasure's games so rewarding to play through. You'll struggle at first getting through all this to the pulse-pounding music. It feels like the Genesis is about to explode from how much sound is being processed at once. But once you've had a few tries and you start quickly dodging everything being thrown at you, you feel like a god. Treasure came out swinging so hard in the first try, they ended up setting the standard for run and gun games, and barely any devs since then have truly come close to claiming the throne for sheer polish and variety. I played through Gunstar Heroes through the Sega 3D Classics port on the Nintendo 3DS. This is probably the best version of the game to this day, with zero sprite flickering and very little slowdown compared to the original Genesis version. Along with that, the game looks incredibly crisp on the 3DS's screen, and the 3D effects used here are among the best in the system, making an already great looking game look even better. There's a few additional modes too, most notably the Gunslinger mode that gives you the ability to switch your shooting style and weapons at the press of a button. While I would probably recommend using the original mode in your first playthrough, this new mode is great if you want to play through the game with a new twist. The game has been ported to tons of other platforms as part of the numerous Sega Genesis compilations and can be purchased on Steam for $1. So if you haven't played it yet, what the fuck are you doing? Play this game, it's one of the best action games of all time! Fucking do it! Unfortunately, making 10 out of 10 original IPs in the mid-90s doesn't exactly pay the bills, so as soon as Treasure had shipped out Gunstar, they had decided with the good old capitalism to sell unhealthy burgers to kids, and the result of that is McDonald's Treasureland Adventure! Ronald McDonald finds 1/4 of a treasure map and decides to look for the other 3 pieces of the map. The owners of the remaining parts are all evil though, so you gotta shoot sparkling magic at them to get their pieces of the map. Rather than the genre-refining masterpiece that is Gunstar Heroes, McDonald's is kind of just a fairly typical 16-bit 2D platformer. You can shoot magic out of your hands and jump. Cool. The most interesting mechanic is Ronald's... I never figured out exactly what this stuff is, but I'ma just call it ribbons. You can use the ribbons to grab onto various hooks and ledges strewn about the stages. It helps make the levels a lot more interesting than they would be if it was just any normal 2D platformer. But the game is still no more difficult than your typical modern 2D Mario game, and the whole experience is over in just a couple of hours, if not less. The gameplay is kinda inoffensive enough, but my biggest issue with the game comes with the ending, which doesn't make any damn sense. Ronald and his friends find out the treasure is on the moon, so they take a rocket ship to go there, only to crash. After having a run-in with some aliens and the only thing resembling a difficult boss fight in the game, Ronald tells the Alien King that he doesn't want the treasure, he just wants to go home. But the whole reason he's on the moon in the first place was to find treasure. I don't get it. And with that, the game's over. No extra content, it's just done. Admittedly, it's admirable enough that the game is actually decent, but yeah, it basically just exists to pay the bills. Thankfully, Treasure would get right back to business with... Dynamite Headdy. So after getting a bunch of extra funds from Mr. McDonald's, Treasure went on to produce their next original game for the Genesis. Rather than going for another super fast-paced run-and-gun explosive adventure, we got a slower but more colorful and wacky 2D platformer with the lesser appreciated Dynamite Headdy. On the outside, it may just look like any other platform on the Genesis, especially if you're just looking at the box art or the title screen. I mean, look at this guy. He's like Sonic, but yellow and with a decapitated head. And he has this fucking DreamWorks-ass smirk. Okay, maybe that's being a bit rude towards Headdy here, but he has a unique design that really sticks out and reminds me a lot of those early attempts at cartoonish 3D characters like Andre from Andre and Wally B. This was probably intentional since the Japanese box art for the game is in 3D and, at least as far as I know, this is the first time Treasure used that visual style for anything. Unfortunately, Headdy would kind of just be buried under all of the other inferior mascots of the era, because no one likes things that resemble clowns. He's still pretty cool though. The game does have a pretty unique premise. Headdy is a puppet from Treasure Theater, and the evil Dark Demon Lord dude is taking over the land and it's up to Headdy's attached head to stop him. Headdy can shoot his head in any of 8 directions, utilizing it for both attacking enemies and grabbing onto things for platforming. It's kind of an evolution of that ribbon mechanic from McDonald's, but way smoother and more fun to use. We also got a variety of different power-ups, most of them being simple upgrades to the basic head attack. But we have some more unique ones, like this one that turns you small, and another that turns you to a racist caricature that's probably inspired by some Japanese yokai or something. Something that Headdy really nails has to be the pacing and level variety. The game immediately starts off with this wild chase sequence before shoving into the first boss, and then you get the tutorial, which is totally optional. The first couple levels seem like pretty typical platforming stuff you'd expect based on what the game has taught you already, but then it just keeps constantly throwing new obstacles at you, like these impressive 3D platforms that literally only exist for a single level, these spinning platforms, climbing a tall tower while fighting a boss, the obligatory shmup level, and more. The game is already short at only a couple hours long, as per usual for Treasure, but the variety of obstacles makes it feel like almost no time at all. The bosses are equally as creative, with Treasure continuing to flex their technical prowess on the Genesis with rotating pseudo-3D environments that echo Mario Galaxy Cronoa more than anything else in 16-bit hardware. Treasure truly went all out with as many ideas as they could for the puppet show theme. It's impressive how cohesively everything in the game comes together. Also, I didn't really have anywhere else to talk about it, so I'll get this out of the way here. The music. Out of all Treasure Genesis titles, I believe this one has the best OST of the bunch. It's not quite as intense as Gunstar, but it makes up for it with how catchy and memorable most of the tracks are. Stuff like Southtown, Spinderella, and the Nasty Gatekeeper. Are the good shit. I think it says something when the only games that I can really compare to Dynamite Headdy to are later platformers like Rayman or Ristar, but with that treasure touch. However, one particular thing to note about the game is its difficulty. Treasure's known for creating challenging games, but I'd argue Headdy is the hardest one that they made on the Genesis, at least if you're playing on its standard difficulty. Or at least the Western version is. Yeah, for some reason when localizing the game they thought it'd be a great idea to increase the challenge by adding extra obstacles and increasing the health or damage of certain bosses. There's several other differences between the two versions of the game as well, but I'd recommend if it's your first time playing to go with the Japanese version due to the more balanced difficulty. Thankfully, more recent re-releases of the game include the Japanese version alongside the international one, so it's not difficult to play it officially. My first time through, I played it with Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection on the PlayStation 3, which for some reason was the only Treasure game included in the collection. It's mostly a fine port, but some people may not like the forced bilinear filter, giving the game a blurrier look than typical emulation. The Japanese version does have a fan translation, but it can still easily be played even without the translation if you're playing it through official means, like the recent Sega Genesis and Mega Drive Classics collection on Switch, PS4, Xbox One, and Steam. We're going to be mentioning this one a lot. Dynamite Headdy is another hit for Treasure, and while it's maybe not as good as Gunstar, it clearly showed they weren't just a one-hit wonder. Once again though, we'd have to wait a bit for their next original title. If McDonald's was the obligatory licensed game Treasure made between Gunstar and Dynamite Headdy, then YuYu Hakusho Makyo Toitsusen is the equivalent game between Headdy and their next game, Alien Soldier. YuYu Hakusho! Granted, compared to McDonald's, YuYu Hakusho is a much more ambitious and surprisingly solid and original fighter for the time. I'm not too familiar with the source material, I'm more of a Hunter x Hunter guy myself, but hey, someday I might watch YuYu Hakusho, so I'm gonna refrain from discussing anything related to the actual plot because, from what I know, this is just an adaptation of the tournament arc in the show. Anyway, I love me some fighting games, and to be totally honest, this game alone could probably deserve an entire video just trying to analyze it, especially its inspirations and how it could have inspired other fighters. I really would have loved to do more research into how it innovated in the fighting game genre, but that's kinda out of the scope of this project. At least from my experience playing other Capcom fighters around this time, there's nothing else like it, and SNK wasn't exactly going too wild in '94 either. In YuYu Hakusho, every character is a universal double jump, something that would be pretty common in some of Capcom's Versus series of fighters, but was only an ability one or two characters would have had in a single game until then. Not only that, but one of the characters in YuYu Hakusho has the ability for an infinite air dash! This came out the same year that Magneto pioneered the flying 8-way dash, and Darkstalkers had a singular character with a basic air dash. But this dude's outdoing today's anime fighters with an infinite air dash! In fact, it seems like a lot of elements in this game inspired later anime-style fighting games. It's not like YuYu Hakusho didn't take some inspiration itself, having a two-lane fighting system similar to what Fatal Fury was doing at the time. It seems kinda useless at first, but YuYu Hakusho brought another innovation. 4-player battles. That's right. Even before Smash and even before dramatic battles, YuYu Hakusho brought 4-player 2D fights to the Sega Genesis, with barely any slowdown. 2v2, 3v1, or full-on free-for-all battle royale, it's got it all. The only other game that I can think of that tried something similar to this is Guilty Gear Isuka, and that came out like a decade later. I just wish I was able to play with a real person, but that's kind of impossible at the time I'm making this video. but I don't know, maybe there's enough potential here for YuYu Hakusho to become the Genesis' equivalent to Sailor Moon S, the opposite end of the salty anime fighters. Not like it needs to be said, but Treasure was pretty ahead of its time and managed to create one of the most unique fighting games on the Sega Genesis. Unfortunately, because it was based on an anime that hadn't been localized at the time, the game never got a Western release, with the exception of a Brazilian version in 1999. So if you're going to play this today, you'll have to rely on an emulator. That's what I did at least, but it's worth it if you're interested in the history of anime fighters. Gunstar Heroes put Treasure on the map. Dynamite Headdy proved they were here to stay. The licensed games made them some extra cash. Alien Soldier defined their action to perfection. Continuing to be ahead of their time, Alien Soldier had super detailed sprites with the speed of the Mega Drive's best. Once again, there's some detailed lore here, but all you really need to know is that you are this Birdman named Epsilon Eagle, and you need to defeat 25 plus bosses through some of the best run and gun shooting around. You got 6 weapons and equip any combination of 4. Combo weapons aren't brought back, but if you want, you can fill all 4 slots with the same gun. In Gunstar, you have to choose from 2 different shooting styles and stick with one till the end. Now you can switch styles with a simple button combination, utilizing whatever works best for the current battle. You'll need to be constantly switching weapons too, as you have limited ammo this time. Alongside your weapon skills, you have 2 other abilities to assist you on your mission. The Counter Force, which can reflect enemy attacks or turn them into healing items with proper timing, and the Zero Teleport, which will instantly dash you across the screen without taking any damage, and can be done in mid-air. You can hover too if you need to fine-tune your aim further. With all of this in tow, it's up to pure skill whether you'll make it to the end. You do have a couple of difficulty options to help you on your way with super easy and super hard. Go with super easy, at least for your first run, as it gives you unlimited continues and bosses have a bit less health and slightly different patterns. It's not really that different. At least as far as I know. Either way, you still got a challenge ahead of you. The way Alien Soldier encourages and rewards skillful play is unlike any other 16-bit game I've played. It feels like a modern indie gamer style action title more than something made for the Genesis in 1995. It truly is the Treasure running gun style, polished to a mere sheen. Dodging each boss's attacks with the dash feels incredibly satisfying, since each fight only really lasts at most like 3 minutes, usually less. Dying constantly isn't really disencouraging at all, as you can always jump right back in and try again, at least on super easy mode anyway. There are plenty of cool bosses here, but once again, the standout is the obligatory transforming mecha boss, 7 Force, returning from Gunstar Heroes. It's the longest, most difficult boss in the entire game, clocking in with only 5 forms? Really? It seems pretty difficult at first, but with enough practice you start learning how to reduce the amount of damage you take, to the point that you can easily get through phases without taking a single hit. And once it's all over, you can try going through it again to improve your times and your damage. Alien Soldier is just great. If you love Gunstar Heroes, this is easily a worthwhile successor. I do wonder if the game could have had extra support for the Genesis 6-button controller though. It almost feels like there's too many actions you can do with how few buttons you have. Having the dash, stance, change, and counter on their own dedicated buttons would easily reduce some of the few control frustrations I had with the game. Otherwise, I think it's hard to point out anything I really dislike about it. I do think I like Gunstar just a bit more since there's more variety in the level design and set pieces in there, plus the inclusion of multiplayer. I played this through the port including the Sega Ages 2500 Volume 25 Gunstar Heroes Treasure Box. That's a long title for the PlayStation 2. Gunstar and Headdy are included here too, with both their Japanese and American versions, and even the bonus Game Gear port of Gunstar Heroes. Out of the not very many ways to play Alien Soldier, this is probably the best due to the variety of resolution options and it removes sprite flickering and slowdown compared to the original Genesis version, and its emulations in the Wii Virtual Console and the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive Classics collections. The American version was originally exclusive to the Sega Channel service, so unless you have a Japanese Mega Drive, the only way to play the game at 60Hz, with everything translated, is the other re-releases. But no matter how you play it, Alien Soldier is a badass game, and easily a close second for Treasure's best yet. An absolute must-play. Oddly enough, despite how much Alien Soldier feels like the perfect swan song to the Genesis for Treasure, they actually ended up making just one more title for the system before saying goodbye for real. And it's certainly their most unique game on the system? Well, unique in that it's unlike the rest of their games, but the actual premise and gameplay is very typical compared to how wild their library has been so far. Light Crusader is an isometric dungeon crawling action RPG, sort of like Zelda with a higher emphasis on the action aspect. Although the game's most obvious inspiration would actually be Landstalker, another isometric action RPG for the Genesis. I haven't played that one though, so going into this I didn't really know too much about what to expect. Plot seems pretty simple. There's some bad stuff going on in this medieval town, and the king orders you to explore the underground dungeons and deal with the problem. Fight monsters, solve puzzles, yeah? I don't know, there's not really a whole lot of stuff unique to Light Crusader. At least not a whole lot that other games have done better since. Even the aesthetics are pretty standard, with not nearly as much the visual flair and polish of Treasure's other titles. If you told me this game was made by a Western developer, I wouldn't doubt it at all. There are some fancy pseudo 3D effects as usual, as you can see with the doors here, but not nearly to the level as some of the stuff we saw being done in Dynamite Headdy. At least the music's still pretty good. It's kind of hard for Treasure to mess that up. Probably the most unique thing about the game is its magic system. Taking some notes from Gunstar Heroes, you have access to 4 different elements that can be combined together for a total of 16 different spells. Which, yeah, doesn't sound like a whole lot, but this was 1995. For example, if you just use the fire element by itself, you'll get this tiny fireball, but combine it with the wind element and you'll get the Firewind spell, which is a larger fireball. Okay, it's not like Gunstar was super creative with some combinations either, but I don't know. We also have this very rudimentary 3D platforming that makes me wish this got an enhanced port on the 3DS or something, because depth perception is a bitch with some of these. Like, if you look at another action RPG that has platforming elements released years later, like East Origin, we're jumping around all over the place, but because technology had evolved enough to allow 2D sprites on a 3-dimensional plane with polygonal environments, it's a lot easier to judge where you're jumping. It also helps that these games figured out that isometric perspectives aren't exactly ideal when you're dealing with this shit. It just makes Light Crusader feel aged. Like, Treasure's big 3 on the Genesis all feel timeless. They play as well today as they did 25 years ago, but Light Crusader doesn't cut it. It just makes you want to play Ys, because Ys is awesome. And yeah, that is a pretty middling note to end this part on, but hey, if you want to try out Light Crusader for yourself, it is also in the same Sega Genesis and Mega Drive Classics collection as all of Treasure's other Genesis titles, and the Genesis Mini too. I just played this one using RetroArch though, because I'm cheap. But hey, if you end up buying these collections, be sure to give Treasure's other games a try because they are seriously some of the best works on Sega's 16-bit console. And as we move away from 16-bit, we move into another golden age for Treasure. Next time, we'll be taking a look at Treasure's work from the 32-bit era, from Guardian Heroes on the Saturn to Sin and Punishment on the Nintendo 64. Stay tuned for more Treasure goodness.